From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. Public transportation keeps Louisville moving, but right now, TARC is facing a financial crisis. A major budget shortfall could mean severe cuts to bus service, leaving thousands of people with fewer options to get to work, school, and pick up their daily essentials. So what happens if these cuts go through? Today, we're breaking it all down, what's at stake, who's affected, and what solutions might be on the table with two guests at the forefront of this issue. Chris Glasser is the president of Streets for People, a Louisville-based nonprofit advocating for safe and convenient walking, biking, and transit. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also joined by Michael Blackwood, co-manager of the Louisville Democratic Socialists of America's Get on the Bus campaign, advocating for sustainable funding solutions to support public transit. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
And just a note, TARC is an underwriter of Louisville Public Media. So I have to ask, do you both ride public transit? And if not, why not? If so, have you seen it change over the years? Chris, I'll start with you.
Sure. I don't currently. I'm not a regular rider. I'm 42 now. In my 20s, I was a regular rider of transit. Now I have two kids in preschool and kindergarten, and so there's a lot of carpooling in my life right now.
And you?
Yeah, so I took a standing room only 4 bus here this morning. I don't ride TARC as much as I'd like. It doesn't always go where I need to go when I need it to go, but that's also the problem we're trying to solve. So
Right. So you've seen it change over time then?
Yeah, I mean, there's been cuts the last couple of years, and there's always been room to grow.
Okay. So, Michael, I want to start with you. What were your thoughts when you learned that Louisville's public transit system is facing potential service cuts? Were you surprised?
No. And I actually kind of think that a lot of people shouldn't have been surprised. DSA, we've been doing the Get on the Bus campaign for almost 2 years now. So we were working with ATU on this before the fiscal cliff happened. And TARC has been underfunded for decades, really. In their yearly budget reports, their long-term plans have always called out the need for more funding to come, or this was going to happen. And then, they stretched as far as they could, and it finally happened. And I think, some people are surprised, and I think that's, maybe not paying attention to the issue.
Chris, anything to add?
I would totally agree.
Yeah. You said it very well.
Thank you.
So public transit is about more than just getting from point A to point B. It connects people to jobs, education, and essential services. How does TARC fit into your organization's broader vision for Louisville, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think transit is just having viable transit is an important part of just like an urban community, a community where people aren't reliant on cars to get everywhere they need to go. So, we're very much a multimodal advocacy organization that includes walking, biking, and transit. And I think, in a lot of cities and communities that we've enjoyed living in, that is a viable way to get around.
And what about you, Michael? How does this fit into?
So obviously DSA, we care a lot about, working class Louisvillians, and I think it is really a working class issue. It's a freedom of movement, a right to the city kind of thing. You look at all of the lines that have survived the cuts so far, they're all the ones that serve like the big union shops in town. And so, I think that goes to show the power that working class people have when it comes to transit. And, without transit, that's really, really impacting working class Louisvillians.
And Michael, you sort of talked about this with the campaign for Get on the Bus. This was happening, this idea of creating this push for increased public transit funding happened before kind of they went off the fiscal cliff. Was there something specific that ignited like, hey, we need to create this?
So, we've had a relationship with ATU Local 1447. That's the bus drivers union for a while now. We've done, solidarity support with them in the past when they've worked through their contracts. And so, they are the ones who see the writing on the wall kind of before anybody else. And they came to us with, we need to help figure out how to get, TARC a more sustainable funding and, grow for the future. So that's why we ended up on, the leading edge of this.
So you're collaborating together, but beyond that, you have more partnerships on this initiative. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we're trying to build a coalition of organizations that are in support of addressing TARC's funding situation and providing more funding. We have, as of today, 28 member organizations of that. We have 7 unions. So that's ATU. We have the GE Appliances Union, JCTA, that's the JCPS teachers, the Library Union. We have 5 neighborhood associations. We have a bunch of different advocacy groups, student organizations. We kind of run the gamut, and we really want to bring in, as many organizations as we can for this.
And then, Chris, I want to turn to you about your organization, Streets for People, which advocates for making Louisville a city where people can walk, bike, and take transit more easily, like we've been talking about. So how would reductions in bus service affect that vision?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, I think to comment on the campaign that DSA has put out there, I mean, I do think that there's so much that is right about what what they're advocating for, and I think that largely I'm very much in support of that, and I think Streets for People is as well. As Michael was going through, and we've talked about this as going through the groups that support that initiative. Streets for People is not signed on to that group, and I think this is where we see, as an advocacy organization, that they're, what the important point is here for getting transit into a viable space in the city. And I think that really the thing that needs to change is the way we structure the occupational tax. And this is something that is very much touched on by DSA and by local media that's talked about this. And I think this is really like the crux of the issue in my mind right now. I think that the TARC has, over the past couple of years, has very much restructured the network that they have to be, I would describe it as the previous network being like a little bloated, a little disorganized, and costs were being driven up by that. And I think TARC has taken some really tough and important steps towards cutting back on the expanded service that it had to really focus on what are the viable routes, what are the routes that really have high ridership and are important routes for our city. And they've sort of cut these routes that only come once every 45 minutes. And if you have a route that only comes once every 45 minutes, it's just really not serving anyone well. And our feeling has been yes, with the fiscal reality being what it is, these are the routes that are appropriate to cut. And really where you have the 4 that Michael was mentioning earlier, these are the routes you really want to invest in. It's previously coming once every 15 minutes. I think they cut it back to, did they cut it back to once every 20 minutes?
I think it's 20, yeah.
Yeah. But, and so that's, 3 times an hour. It was 4 times an hour. It would be great if it was 5 times an hour, once every 12 minutes. So these are the incremental steps that I think make transit viable. That the 4 is a lot more viable if it's coming once every 12 minutes than if it's coming once every 20 minutes. And these are the sort of the small changes I think that are really important to making the network viable for the citizens of Louisville. Right.
So that you're talking about those 3 outline plans, right? That TARC has laid out, which was the limited, the enhanced, and growth. So it sounds like you've had a chance to review these. I mean, Chris, is there one that stands out above the rest for you when you're looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first immediate step that they're talking about going to is the reduced service route.
Sure.
And I think that is a strong baseline. I think we look at that, and I think Michael agrees that you look at that, and that's the foundation. That's you're talking about the 4 on 4th Street, you're talking about Broadway and Bardstown Road, you're talking about the Dixie line, and you're keeping the frequency there and making that viable for those routes. And that's your core, that's your baseline. And I think the next step off there, that the expanded network, is incrementally increasing that, taking the 4 from a once every 20 minutes to a once every 12 minutes. Those sorts of improvements I think are important. And frankly, there's just not enough funding in the system right now to even get to that. So it's not
right.
Which one do I prefer? It's we don't even have money to get to that level.
Right.
And it's it's really a math equation in a lot of ways. And so yes, the growth model is amazing. I think Michael and I would love to see that. And it's not really a question of could I wave a magic wand and make that the network? It's well, is there a pathway towards getting $30 million annually more in the budget? And it's I don't know. That really is a magic wand that I don't know that anybody has.
Yeah, and Michael, I know that your campaign is advocating for that growth option, which would, like you said, significantly expand transit access. Can you talk about this plan and why you believe this is the best approach for Louisville's future as we talk about solutions?
Yeah, so it's super cliche. I always feel very cliche saying it, but transit is really one of those if you build it, they will come kind of things, right? You need transit to go where you're going. It needs to come frequently. It needs to go when you're trying to go. And if it doesn't meet that in any way, then it's completely unusable for you, right? So, just one element of that is enough to deter you. So, the growth option is the one that provides the most coverage, the most frequency, the most number of lines. So that's really what's going to help drive even more ridership. It is tough to get there financially, but also it is, possible to get there. Chris mentioned, occupational tax referendum. The Kentucky State Revised Code does kind of stipulate this whole system for mass transit agencies. Through that, we can do up to a 1% tax referendum. Currently, we're at 0.2%. We just bumped that up a few tenths of a percent, and we could fund even the growth option. So that's an option, but unfortunately, that wouldn't happen tomorrow. So another option would be for the city to step in through the city budget. Now, that is like a long putt. There's a lot of money that's needed to fill that gap. Even for the enhanced option still needs more money. But we do believe that the money is there functionally. It's just kind of a political will situation. The last few years, the city's run on average like a $30 million budget surplus. So even that would be, most of the way to a growth option. Then that's without even having to play with other buckets in the budget. So, Metro Council has a few levers they can pull, and we're trying to, build public support to make them pull those levers.
So with those options, though, specifically, we'll start with the tax referendum. Do you think, because you're out there, you're talking to people, do you think the public would vote in favor of a tax referendum when looking at the drop in ridership and services? Of course, it's a chicken or the egg situation.
Right. I do think that public support is there. In addition to our coalition building work, we also have a demand letter, like a petition that we're doing. And we have over 1,000 people who have signed on to that just in the last few months. And if you look at, our kind of peer cities, Nashville just passed a 0.5% sales tax. Cincinnati just renewed a 0.25% sales tax and added 0.5 on top of that. So, those are cities that are very similar to us. I think when you talk about cities that have expanded transit, people will be like, oh, well, of course, New York and Portland, whatever, expanded
Right.
transit. But those are cities that are not too dissimilar from us. So I think that it could happen here, and we're trying to build the support for that now so that when a referendum does come, we're ready for it.
And I would also ask, I guess, what have you noticed or what do you know of the challenges of repurposing the budget, the city budget? Is that something that they're in favor of or something that's been proposed before?
It's tough. So the way, it works in Louisville is the mayor proposes a budget and then Metro Council approves it. And we, by and large, just take the mayor's budget and pass it whole cloth, maybe tweak it a little bit. It doesn't actually have to work that way. Metro Council could kind of just scrap the mayor's budget if they didn't like it and do whatever they want. Ideally, the mayor would support this and include it in his budget proposal. And then if not, Metro Council would have the ability to, put it in. We've talked to Metro Council members about it. There are some who support it. And I think, this kind of mass movement, getting people engaged and putting public pressure on is what's going to make some Metro Council members swing in that direction.
I think, again, I think Michael and I agree like 95% on things. And I, just for the purpose of conversation, I think I want to sort of take issue or talk about maybe the 5% where we're maybe not totally aligned. And I think one point is that, it's been reported by numerous news agencies, the $30 million shortfall. And I think there's some advocacy around Metro government could fill that in. Michael just mentioned the $30 million that it has surplus annually. And I think that doesn't actually press TARC to make the hard choices that it's needed to make about what are the routes that we have that are just inefficient, that are just not serving the community well. And it's not purely like we need to fund TARC. I think there is this thing that's been sitting out there for 15, 20 years of TARC has some some excess routes that are just not serving the community well. And the network redesign that they are undergoing, I think, is a great exercise and a great redesign thing for them, where they've really focused on how can we make our service better. So we want TARC to come in this direction a little bit too, and I think in how they're designing the network so that it is a truly like a high ridership network, and not just like saying that they cover every corner of the county, because that's not an efficient way to run a transit network.
Well, we'll be back in a minute. You're listening to On Track on Louisville Public Media. You're back on track. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and we are talking about the future of public transit and potential TARC bus route cuts with Chris Glasser, president of Streets for People, and Michael Blackwood, co-manager of the DSA's Get on the Bus campaign. And Chris, Streets for People has helped host TARC's public meetings about these plans. What has been the public response so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, our group is very self-selecting. It's just transit nerds who are just would love to see this stuff happen. And, they're folks who've maybe lived in D.C. or Boston or places, Portland, and they're just I would love, let's have light rail. Let's do that. So my group, I don't believe for a second is representative of the city as a whole. My group loves this stuff. And I think that's where I sort of try to temper a little bit, where I'm maybe pushing back a little bit on Michael, is to say I want TARC to be fully funded, but I also think that TARC, we need a better TARC. And I think TARC, the new leadership of TARC, and that's led by Ozzie Gibson, has really, I think, embraced that idea to understand that the network that they're putting out there for the citizens really needs to be honed and tightened up a little bit. So, I mean,
we talked about the shortfall, and that there's these major cuts that, even with some major cuts, some of these options might only be funded till 2030. So what kinds of long-term funding solutions do you think could realistically support a more stable and expansive future for public transit in Louisville, and what are the challenges?
If I may, I mean, Michael was mentioning Nashville, and I think that's an interesting compare contrast there. And I think one is that they did that as a sales tax. We don't have that option in Louisville to do a local option sales tax. Mayor Fisher previously tried to put that in the toolbox, working with the state, and that's just not something that we can vote on locally to even have an increase in our sales tax. We would have to do an occupational tax increase, as Michael has mentioned. But I do think it's instructive how Nashville crafted their tax increase, and it's not just transit. It's not solely on that. And I think they included complete streets and other things that sort of sell it as a package. And I think Louisville could similarly sell to the citizens, put on a ballot referendum that is for parks. So we have a Parks for All report that came out last year about how our parks are underfunded. We've talked about libraries being underfunded. We've talked about transit being underfunded. And I think if you package them together in this sort of feel good package of what if we raised the occupational tax and we put it towards these things, and this percentage went to that, and this percentage went over here, that could, to me, that sells a little better than just saying, purely making it about TARC and TARC only.
So I it's interesting to hear that, because we talked about Nashville and Cincinnati, these kind of similar mid-sized cities that took these efforts, which of course took political will and strong public support. And that's one option for doing things a little differently or better. What else could, if we're thinking about, political will and strong public support, what other things could we do different in Louisville to create that kind of momentum for improved transit?
Yeah, so I think TARC is doing the right groundwork now, right? This network redesign is federally funded. So, we're taking money that came from outside the city to make the city better. And regardless of how we address the funding long term, we are still building a better TARC. And all of these build off each other. Given the growth option, assumes implementing the enhanced and then, a staged rollout to growth. So I think that long term, we're setting TARC up for success. And then, the funding wise, the occupational tax, like Chris mentioned, what's nice about that is that the state has carved out and up to 1% occupational tax specifically for mass transit. So something that's nice about that is, if we pass a referendum for, say half a percentage point, outside of that, it'd be hard to make sure that all that money actually goes to TARC. Versus with this, if we pass X percentage, it's definitely going to TARC, and we can group it with other things. And then, like we mentioned before, I think that, a referendum won't happen tomorrow, even if we wanted it to. And TARC is running out of money today. So that's where, the city can, at least temporarily, I'd like to see it be a permanent fixture, step in and help float TARC in the interim. Because I do feel, for the complaints that have been levied against TARC over the years, they're really doing their homework, right? Having these external consultants come in, go back to square one, redesign everything, a bunch of a lot of public input. It's really, really good work. And I think that we owe meeting TARC halfway on it.
So we do talk about this tax referendum. We're talking about local government being involved in the conversation. We talked about proposed legislation. Is there any current policies or conversations or someone who's at the table right now that's really involved in this particular issue that you're aware of?
That's a great question. And I think Michael and I looking at each other and not immediately know the answer. I think there's a little bit of a vacuum here of like someone claiming responsibility for this. And WFPL had a great report on this last April, and just talking about there's a lot of finger pointing of the Metro Council being what, the agency needs to take this up and really go out to the citizens, and the agency being well, we can provide the facts, but it's really up to the mayor's office or Metro Council. They're the elected officials, and I think we see it as there's a little bit of finger pointing, a little bit of that's a hot potato that I don't want to touch, and I don't want to be out there, at the forefront of pushing for this ballot referendum that might be a big political loser. And I guess the things that I've heard from the more progressive council members, again, is this idea of looping it into a larger, a broader tax that's around some things like parks and libraries that I think when you pull them all together into a bucket, I do think there might be a pathway forward there. But to answer your question, I do think there's a little bit of a vacuum in the center of this conversation of who's actually going to put themselves out there for this.
Michael, anything to add?
Yeah, it's tough because, somebody like TARC, they're a bit, they're part of the city. It's hard for them to advocate for themselves in, a boots on the ground kind of way. Like Chris said, they can put all the information out there, and then it's kind of up for other people and other groups to interpret. I've talked to some Metro Council members who support the idea of doing a referendum and funding TARC, and they want to see TARC grow. But the concern, is a political will thing. If we did a referendum tomorrow, would it pass? And there are some council members who, would want it to pass but don't think it would. And that's where we're trying to step in and show, okay, look, we have all these people, all these workers, all these unions that, support this. And so if the time does come, they will come out and vote and give them the confidence, and then they'll be able to start doing, the internal work that takes to bring a referendum to the people.
Yeah, and I think, to go back to this point of making it specifically about TARC or not TARC, and in 2007, there was a library-specific referendum that got voted down 2-1. So, I think there's no easy assumption that a referendum specifically, broadly or specifically, would get approval. And so I think there is that thing, and thinking about how TARC could sell this to community. I think there's an aspect of this where TARC needs to build some excitement and show some fun and excitement around transit, and that's where I would love to see them experiment with stuff a little bit. I don't know if that's purely on TARC or the mayor. I think Mayor Fisher he experimented with an electric bus that did a downtown loop. I think that was largely a failure, but I think it was an interesting, fun. He was out there talking about transit, and I think one thing TARC in the plans that they've proposed, the enhanced network, they've talked about this crosstown this new crosstown route that would be sort of along the eastern parkways and connect sort of in this area between the urban core and the suburban area. And I think what if they rolled out this new line and and gave it a new name and really tried to sell it in that way. And I think there's sort of like a little bit of like a communications element to and marketing element to what TARC could do. Could they make one of their lines free on a Friday? Could just to draw attention to it. Like for me, for a lot of citizens, for myself, it's like, how do I even use TARC? And so like get people on the bus, say like, every Friday at free Fridays for TARC, and while you're on the bus, on the 23 bus on Broadway and Bardstown Road, there's TARC representatives like telling you how to, like, here's how you get a TARC card. Here's, make it easy for people. And I think selling the network, selling TARC, I think is something that's like a little bit not in the conversation so much right now.
So for people listening who want to get involved, who are concerned about potential service cuts, who want to know more and create some concrete steps forward to get involved, what's a way they can do that to support public transit in Louisville better? Michael, I'll start with you.
So TARC has been doing a really good job of getting the word out about their redesign. They have a calendar on their site where they have like 5 meetings a night where they're going through all 3 of their proposals and what they would take, money-wise, what the differences would be, service, coverage, frequency, and so on. So if you want to have like a deep dive on what TARC is doing, those meetings are a really, really good place to start. And a lot of those they take place at neighborhood associations or churches, or I think both of our organizations have meetings where TARC is coming and presenting. So, that's a chance to engage with an organization that cares about transit, and then also with TARC. So,
Chris, anything you would say?
Yeah, I mean, totally would agree. I mean, we're having an event tonight, and I've invited Michael to talk at it about TARC is going to be there presenting the networks, and and so yeah. I mean, I think exactly what he said.
Chris, Michael, thank you so much for being here on Track.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, thank you.
Chris Glasser is the president of Streets for People, a Louisville-based nonprofit advocating for safe and convenient walking, biking, and transit. And Michael Blackwood is the co-manager of the DSA's Get on the Bus campaign, advocating for sustainable funding solutions to support public transit. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Jacob Munoz, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at louisvilleontrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about? Something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending us a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, fewer rides creates greater divides. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media.